I'm Ashley. Today I'm doing some urban sketching in my home. And I'm just wondering if anybody else has ever done this type of thing. I did see during the COVID lockdowns that some people actually did like challenges of urban sketching inside their homes, and I was pretty intrigued by that. Let me know in the comments if there's things around your house that you like to sketch. So, what I decided to sketch is my dog. So, thankfully, she's super lazy. She doesn't move very much. So that made it very helpful for me to sketch her from life versus from a photograph, since I don't really have a lot of practice sketching kind of living, moving things. And she's lazy and she doesn't move much, so that really helped. She really did stay there the whole time I was sketching this, and she did move a few times, but not enough to make it matter. So I did speed up this video by about 4 times, and I have some kind of jump cuts in here to make it a bit shorter because this video is pretty long with the sketch and then doing the fine liners and the watercolor. Took me about probably an hour, and let's see, if I add it all together, a little over an hour and a half, maybe an hour and 40 minutes to do the whole thing. So I did kind of pare it down a bit. So you can see I really just sat on the couch. I put my phone kind of over my shoulder to film, and I used a pencil to sketch. So some areas were harder to sketch than others, notably her face. Faces are really hard for me. I feel like they're the one thing that you really have to get at least like the proportions right to make the sketch make sense. What do you feel like is the hardest thing to sketch? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear. So overall, after getting the face in, the rest wasn't too bad. This sketch really only took me about 16 minutes, and I was pretty proud of how fast I was able to do that. I didn't know how long she would actually stay still, so I was trying to go fast. I didn't think that I would be quite that fast. 16 minutes, not bad for me. Pretty slow overall sketching. I do know maybe some people can sketch a lot faster than that. And this sketch really is pretty simple in terms of kind of the number of elements. It's really just the dog bed and the dog. So I was still really happy with how quickly I was able to sketch that. And then we just go in, and later I come back and finish it off. All right, so we had the video of me sketching this picture of my dog from, well, not picture, I guess, this sketch of my dog from life. And now I'm gonna go in and use my fine liners to, because I'm gonna make this a line and wash. It's kind of like urban sketching at home. So I am just gonna take, starting with a 0.1 or 0.1, and I'll go up and kind of thicken up some of the lines later, but for now, this is what I'm starting with. And just kind of gonna make this a little bit loose and sketchy, and trying to kind of capture the feel of this kind of bumpy dog bed, different kind of seams here. So just trying to keep it loose and kind of holding my pen a little bit farther up, trying to keep that sketchy feel. All right, so now to go in and do just some very small lines to show where the cushion's kind of sunk in, right? So there's some creases in that fabric because she's laying on the center, and it's making that part sunken. You can tell that because she is kind of hiding in that a little bit, right? And then I'll go in and add some shadows and stuff later for that too, but just kind of get some basics in there. So now on to my dog. So her name is Kiara. She is a Rhodesian Ridgeback. You can see just a little bit in the sketch where that hair on her back is growing backwards. Also her tail, you can kind of see that it looks different. So, where do I want to start? Just kind of start up here at her shoulder area, I guess. And she has very short hair. So she's not like super furry looking, but she still isn't completely smooth, right? Because she is hairy. So I don't have to worry about my lines being completely perfect or anything here. So I do have kind of, this is actually just a still shot of when I was taking that video and when I was sketching her. I didn't actually take a picture of her, so I just have kind of that still shot. So it's blurry, but I can use that kind of as reference if I need it, especially for some of these like trickier parts. So her face was, she was in kind of an awkward position, or at least it looked awkward to me. And so her face was like bumpy right here. I don't know, it's kind of weird, but she kind of had like a little bulge there. And then it kind of like that, I guess. Kind of down from her eye. We have more of the bed here. Okay, so now kind of the shape of her back, and I'm gonna do these pen strokes from left to right just because like I said, that hair on her back does grow backwards, so I think that that will get, just doing kind of some sketchy lines here with the pen will get some of that look without having to then go in and do a ton with the watercolor paint after. So I'll just kind of do that on her back and connect it here. And then this part is pretty smooth. And then as we come into the tail, it does kind of that same thing. So this side of the tail is smooth, but the other side has that ridge. Up into her leg. And the leg, basically with how she's curved, it kind of looks like she has like a little crease here. And then another one right here. To kind of just make that look like a little shadowy, hairy crease. And then kind of the same things right here on her front leg or arm, whatever you want to call it. And then this is where her, I don't know if they're called lats on dogs, but we're going to call it a lat. That's where her lat is. You can kind of see that area. And then here you can see like her shoulder blade kind of sticking up a little bit. And it kind of comes around like this. And then down here. And you can see just a little bit of kind of some hairy areas there. All right. And then this is all just going to be like really dark right here because that's her. I don't know if it's part of her or if it's just part of the bed, but anyway, it's all just going to be dark when we get to painting it. And then now we're going to go ahead and do this part of her tail. Okay, now her collar. So let's get that in. Now just to expand kind of on this texture of her ridge, we're just going to come up and now we're going to bring it up toward her neck just a little bit. So this part of her is the darkest part. And I could definitely do this with watercolor instead if I wanted to, but I'm just trying to work on some of my shading techniques with using the ink for it, just to practice. And then kind of the same thing here. There's some shaded areas in here. here. So still just going for some basic shading here. And getting some texture in with some, I guess, hash marks. And then she's got a wrinkly little face. So let's put some of these wrinkles in. She almost looks like she has eyebrows. Then there's kind of like a highlight right there. So let's make it a little bit darker next to it. And then this is all very dark. Kind of going up into this eye. Just based on how the shadows are. Do want to make her eye still stand out a little bit there. So do that. And then her ears, we have a very dark edge here, a little bit of a highlight, and then it kind of comes up like this, and then works its way back down again. Overall, pretty happy with that. I can use now my brush pens to go in and add some shading as well. Overall, this is pretty warm, so I'm going to go in with a warm gray. So these brush pens are great for adding shading. They are waterproof, so they're India ink, I think waterproof, maybe water resistant, but no, I'm pretty sure waterproof. And they're a soft brush pen, so they have like a paintbrush tip to it, and you can get kind of really fine lines by going really with just the tip, and then you can get a thicker line by pressing down harder. So they're kind of nice in that sense. So just kind of adding in some of those shadows with that. So if I'm like here, I want a nice dark line, so I can, or a nice thick line. So I can do a nice thick line and then just lift up and get a little bit lighter, or thinner. Words, they're hard sometimes. And right now, this is a pretty stark contrast, right? This is nearly black, I guess, just a super dark gray. And it's really contrasting with this white paper, but once I get some of the watercolor in, it won't be as much of a contrast. So I'm just gonna go in to some of these areas that I did some of the hashing and go over it because I just want it to be a little bit more solid. Okay, now I'm going to use the lighter one to add some shadows kind of under where Kiara is. So the biggest place that you can see the shadow is right here. And it's a pretty well-defined shadow. It's very much following her curve there. Comes around and goes in to this area. I'm just gonna do some shadow of this on the ground also. So you would see the lights coming from this way, so you can see a little bit of a shadow back here. And then go in with an even lighter one. Okay, I'm just gonna dump all these out. And blend that out even farther. Okay, I can clean that up a little bit with watercolor later if I want to. So I think now I do want to add just a little bit, and this is, I'm going off path here. I'm gonna add just a little bit of context. So she was sleeping in front of the fireplace, so I'm just gonna kind of put the bottom part of the fireplace. I don't know what that area is called, but it's like a stone little ledge in front of the fireplace. So I'm gonna put that in, and it's kind of bumpy because it is stone. There we go. And then it just kind of goes back like that, and we'll just make it simple. Leave it back like that, kind of get some impression that there's stones here. There we go. And then same for here, just kind of an impression that this stone is coming down. Same here. Okay. I don't know. We'll see if I end up liking it or not. And then this is kind of where the wall starts, I guess. I don't know. Okay, and then these are wood floors going in that direction. So just add some planks in. I think that'll help make the shadows make more sense. There we go. Okay, I think that's good. Now for watercolor, just wake up my paints here. I don't know which ones I'm going to use yet, so just kind of get some water dripped into all of them so that they're all ready when I need them. I might use this white gouache also. I don't know if you can see this, my palette, but anyway, get them all woken up. And what do I want to start with? I guess let's start with some brown for the floor. So it's a nice deep brown floor. So just start by getting a wash in of that. And these gray brush pens, you can just go right over them because again, they are waterproof, so they're not gonna bleed at all when you start going over in watercolor, which is nice. So I'm just kind of getting a wash in and then going in with some more concentrated black paint while it's still wet so that it'll diffuse out to get that look of some wood grain texture. And I'm not too concerned about it being perfect. I think that you kind of get the impression of what it is. You don't have to make it perfect by any means. So I'm just trying to keep that area wet so that I can do that same thing and go in with just some more concentrated paint. I just picked up a little bit of black as it bleeds out. I mean, you can do the brown, you can do the black, it doesn't matter that much. But by doing it while it's still wet, you're not going to get harsh lines. You're going to get a nice soft bleed where it's going to look like some texture, but it's not going to look like a harsh line. So here's some just burnt umber, I believe, and then some black. And I'm not cleaning my brush in between, so there's definitely a mix there. That was a little bit too much. That's okay. We'll just blend it out. No big deal, right? Because wood is variable. You have various tones within the same type of wood. That's what makes it so beautiful, really, is that it's not just one thing or one color. Down here it's a little bit harder since it's a smaller space to get some of that streakiness. I don't know, maybe it's not actually harder, maybe I just think it is because my hand wants to be moving bigger. I like these bigger ones better. It's fun. Okay, so there is the wood floor, and I don't always use the same technique. I found sometimes I start with kind of the main subject and then work my way out. Sometimes I start with the background, work my way in. I do like working on the background first because it gives me some context of the lights and darks, which is just kind of helpful when you're then building up layers and contrast. So now I'm going to go into this stone, and it's pretty yellow. Very, very pale though. So I'm actually going to add some white watercolor just to make it more pastel with the yellow. And I'll just do a super, super light wash of that. So to get a light wash, I just grab the color, go into my water, run it on the side like that, tap it on paper towel or napkin, and then just kind of go over there, and you can see it's a super light wash. So I'm going to do that same thing. I tap it and just get that really light wash of that color. And I'm going to do that same thing kind of here, but it can be a little bit darker to make it stand out a little bit more. There we go. And I'm going to get a little bit of bleed from the wood, don't care. And then along kind of these lines, I'm just going to add a little bit more concentrated color. It's still wet, so it's going to bleed out, and that's kind of the goal, is that it doesn't have any harsh lines. And I don't need the background here to be super detailed, right? That's not the focus. That's just to give the main subject some context. So she's not just floating in space. She is in a room with a cozy fireplace. She's curled up. She was, I don't know that it was actually cold. I don't remember exactly when I did this sketch. It's been a little while. She's just lazy, and she likes to just lay around. So she's always laying on her bed. Makes her a pretty easy subject to paint is the nice thing. She doesn't move around a lot. So it's funny though, because Ridgebacks are supposed to be high energy, and mine is like the most lazy dog on the planet, I'm pretty sure. Also, she's a princess. She hates going outside if it's cold or if it's raining. She just likes to be inside, lay around. She'll hold her pee for hours and hours. If it's raining out, try to wait for the rain to pass. She's ridiculous. Okay, now to go in and do the bed. So the bed is a gray color, and it's kind of a warm gray. So I'm going to start with Payne's gray, but that's bluish. And then I'm going to add in a little bit of burnt umber to get a warmer gray color. And then it's very light, so I'm going to do that same thing to create a light wash where I kind of get some of the color, tap it off. Okay, it might not be that light. Add in just a little bit more. And I'm just going to kind of get an even wash over the whole thing for now. I have already added in some shadows with the brush pens and with hashing or lines, so I don't have to worry too much about it. I can almost just throw a wash down, and if I really wanted to, I could just leave it at that. I'll probably add a little bit more to it, but I could realistically just leave it and it would read as dog bed, right? You can tell that that's a dog bed, that she's laying on it, that there's some shadows. But I'll go in and add just a few more details. So I'm trying to make sure that it's pretty evenly wet here. Now this is Moleskine Sketchbook. I do love it. It does not have 100% cotton paper. It's not, I guess, you know, the highest quality paper. It's just a sketchbook. It's great for my purposes, but it doesn't stay wet that long. Okay, so now I'm gonna mix more of that gray color, but it's more concentrated now. And I can go in and add, oops, way too much. Okay, so that's what happens if you have a drop of water on your brush and you don't want it. So don't do that. Get your brush dryer. That's why you always have that paper towel or napkin or something. Okay. And just kind of go in and add some soft shadows here. So I especially want kind of shadow down here around the bottom. I already have the shadow from the brush pens that I used, but I want that to be a nice soft shadow instead of the hard lines that the brush pens get. So you can see it already dried. I went through and made sure it was wet, but it already dried just fine. I can just go in and get my brush wet, dry it off, and then come in and just kind of tap that edge, and it'll bleed out. Okay. Just add a little bit of shadow here, a little bit kind of at the bottom, a little bit kind of around her. These are going to be, again, it's dry now, so these are going to be harder, or it's mostly dry, harder shadows, and I'll go in, tap my brush, and soften them up. Just kind of tap the edges, and then that gets some variation there. All right, you can see the light's coming this way. So this part, since it's sunken in, is going to be a little bit more shadowed. This part has highlight. Over here has some highlight because it's sticking back up, right? But here we have some of that shadow. Pretty good. Happy with that. Now I have to mix up her fur color. So she almost has like a skin tone color, or yellowish, reddish, I don't know how to describe it. Whatever, it's tan. So I'm just gonna mix up a tan. So right now it's super orange, and if it's too much of something, I add the opposite, so it's too orange. So I'm gonna add in just, that's way too much blue. I'm gonna add in just a little bit of blue. Completely just made it green. So, I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just gonna kind of mix all this together so that I have one color in this well. So actually that's a pretty good brown color. She might be a tiny bit more red than that. So I'm just gonna add the smallest bit of pink. Okay, that seems like a pretty good color. And the goal here is to make sure that I preserve highlight areas. So I'm gonna go into the areas that are darker and kind of tap that in. Areas that I've already shaded. Now I have to really focus on where some of those highlights are. So like here on her face, she doesn't have a lot of highlights. Maybe that little part that's sticking out there is a little bit of a highlight. Her eye is very dark. Underneath her eye there's a tiny bit of a highlight, so I'll leave that white kind of above her eye. Up here is darkish. Her ear is dark. Okay. This here, pretty dark. There's a tiny bit of a highlight in the middle, but it's not completely white or anything. Okay, so I got her face in. Now I'm going to clean it off and then mostly dry it and then just touch that center area, touch those edges, and it'll kind of make it bleed in just a tad. And if it bleeds in too much, just dry off your brush, lift out some of the paint. So if I want a highlight to be right here, get my brush wet, dry it off mostly, and then I can lift out some of that paint. You can also take your napkin or whatever after you get an area wet and dab it out, and that lifts it nicely. So I'll have to go in and add some deeper colors here in a little bit, but just kind of getting a little bit of an idea of where those highlights are going to be. So for her body, like right here around her shoulder is highlighted, so I'll go everywhere around that. This part's dark, but that part's kind of light, and then this part gets dark again. Like so. Okay. Her back is all dark. So let's get some darkness in there. The underside of her tail is pretty light, almost white. So we're gonna get just that darkness on the bottom part, or in this picture, the bottom part, but it's actually the top part of her tail. And then go up her ridge here. Into that back part. This is all pretty dark. Connect these shadow areas. There is some highlight there on her side. Now leg wise, she kind of has some lightness down at the bottom of her leg, so I'll go around that, come up and join it there, and then the rest of her leg is darker. So this first coat, though I'm gonna go over it and change it, this is a pretty important layer because it gets me just with that, I don't know how to describe it, like almost like an underpainting where it's showing me what I'm gonna do next. So it is kind of important to get, again, just preserving those highlight areas. So now whatever I do to layer it up is gonna make these areas that I've already painted darker, and then the areas that I haven't painted will stay lighter. Even if I add a wash on top of it, it's gonna stay lighter, right? Because watercolor is transparent, so you'll see those layers below it. So I'm gonna grab, I'm mixing differently this time, so I'm grabbing this burnt sienna, and it's really orange, so I'm just going to add just a tad bit of blue to it. This blue, I can't remember which color that is, which color of blue it is, but it's like really, really strong color. So it kind of overpowers stuff, but just got to be careful with adding it to my mixes. Okay, so anyway, now I'm gonna go in and just continue to build up layers. And I already have some highlight areas, so that gives me like a map almost of where to just add this color. And then I'll go in and add some darkness to the eyes and the nose later, but for now we'll kind of just keep that in my layers. Okay. She really does look like she has an eyebrow there. It's kind of crazy. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, now for her face, I'm going to go ahead and add in some deeper colors. So her ears are really, really dark. They're almost black. They're very dark brown. So we'll add in that to both. So I'm just adding a very watery light wash of black to it. So since it's already wet, it's just bleeding into the brown, making it a nice darker brown. Okay, and then we're gonna do the nose there, the eyes, and the reason I'm doing this now is because that layer beneath it is wet, and so I just want to get that bleed to soften it. Kind of see coming down from her eyes. Works its way into this, and her nose here is also, or the top of her snout is dark. And this all is very dark. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the face. I just don't like these hard edges here, so I'm just gonna tap my brush in the water, dry it off a little bit, and then kind of scrub at those edges just very, very lightly. I'm not scrubbing super hard because, again, not the best paper, and I don't want to damage my paper. So just lightly scrubbing that out, and it'll just soften those edges slightly. And then I can even just kind of tap in some additional color if I want it to be deepened back up in those areas. Now, this highlight that I preserved is now like too light, so I'm just going to get a tiny bit of that wash and add it there, and that'll just kind of take that contrast down just a little bit. Okay, let's go ahead and work on her back a little bit. So this just needs to be darkened up a little bit. And again, we'll just kind of preserve a little bit of highlight there. So you can see at this point, I'm just adding more and more layers to it, just build depth. And this is definitely not like a traditional urban sketch, because those you gotta go faster usually. I did my sketch with her there live in person, and now I'm just taking my time with the painting of it just because I'm having fun. So just kind of going in and doing it. But I will speed this part up because it's just going to be a lot of adding more and more layers in that same technique that I used on the face. Okay, so at this point, I'm trying to get just a tiny bit of texture. So I'm essentially using a dry brush technique now. And I did put some color down, and then I dried my brush and kind of split my bristles so that it's almost acting like a fan brush, just to get a tiny bit of texture, right? Because she's super short furred, super short haired dog, but she still has some texture. So this area is still wet, so it's kind of reacting a little bit differently, but same idea, just getting a tiny bit of texture. And then any areas that I'm not super happy with, like right here, there's a hard edge, so I'm just gonna go in and clean that up, and then dry pretty much all the way, split those bristles up, and go in and on that edge even add just a little bit of that texture. Okay, overall happy. Like the highlight areas, like the darker areas, and I don't think I want to touch it anymore. So not going to do that. Now I do have to color in. Basically at this point it is just color in, right? I already have the shape of it. All of this was a little bit more detailed painting, but this is just, let's color in the collar. So I just have green in my palette here, and I'm just going to add that to her collar. Okay, light wash, and then just go in with a more concentrated color. I might have to let it dry just a little bit because there's a lot of water on the page, but get a more concentrated color and tap in. Yeah, I'm gonna have to let it dry some. It's not doing anything. Too much water. Stop touching it, let it dry for a second. It won't take long. And then I'll go in and get a more concentrated color to add the shadow underneath where that part of the collar is sticking up. There we go. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you made it this far, you might as well like the video and comment on it because you've already invested 40 something minutes in this. I was really happy with how the painting turned out. I think that I really was able to capture some of her texture, definitely her coloring, and then I liked that the bed actually looked like a soft cushion. So if you enjoyed it, like I said, please give the video a like, comment. It would really help my channel out, and I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Bye.